Greetings builders, Daniel here, and today I'm gonna show you 3 of the most played builds during the first week of the Settlers of Kalguur League. If you wanna try any of those, you can find links for POBs and complete guides in the video description. And if this video helps you, please leave a thumbs up to support the channel. Thank you very much, and let's get into it! The first build to make the list is being played by over 5% of high level players. I'm talking about the flaming hot Righteous Fire Chieftain with the Marauder class. This is probably the easiest way to have such a strong presence. You just need to walk past the enemies and they will melt and explode without even touching you. To visit the pros of this build, I would start with how simple it is. Because of the Chieftain Ascendance, you only need to stack fire resistance to have all elemental resistance. Because of that, you can also easily cap your chaos resistance. Keeping on that topic, also because of the Chieftain Ascendance, you can also easily have 90% resistance to all elements, making you very tanky without much investment. Above all of that, Righteous Fire is a super fun and smooth build to play because you just run and shield shard your way through many maps per hour. Now to visit the cons, I'll start saying that this build doesn't have a big single target damage without a lot of investment. But don't worry, you'll be able to kill map bosses easily even on a low budget. This build is an amazing league starter and it's meant as a cheap and fast currency farmer. As for budget, this build is cheap, you can get it destroying early endgame maps with only around 70 chaos. To comfortable advanced 3 yellow maps, I recommend investing around 120 chaos, and for easily completing Erratras, you need to invest around 4 divines, mostly in your survivability. Don't forget that on PoEbuilds.net you can find a list with all the equipment that you need to buy for this build, with direct links for examples being sold by other players. You only need 2 mandatory unique items for this build. The first is the Rise of the Phoenix Shield that grants up to 200 life regeneration per second, and most important, plus 5% to maximum fire resistance. Next, we also need the Cloak of Flames armor that grants 40% of the physical damage you take to be received as fire damage. This is great because we have 90% fire resistance. For clear speed, I'll give it 10 out of 10. You just need to run through the maps and enemies will die just because of your presence. It's super smooth and one of the best clear speed experience you're going to have on PoE. The boss damage on the other hand is not great. I'll give it only 7 out of 10 because you need a lot of currency to scale single target damage. But as I mentioned before, this is meant as a map farmer and you can kill map bosses easily on a low budget. For this survivability, I'll give it 9 out of 10. Thanks to the Chieftain Ascendance, you can get 90% of all elemental resistance and even easily get maximum chaos resistance, all of that combined with over 2000 life regeneration. I only took 1 point out because it needs more investment to be able to face tank physical bosses. Next we have a super popular one, the Cyclone build, and today I have 2 variants of it. The first one is the healed Cyclone of Tumult Slayer with the Duelist class. Now with the new melee buffs, many of you were asking for the update of this build, and here you go, it was an absolute delight to play this one. Now it feels really powerful all the time, almost as we used to feel on bosses with the Ancestral Totems, and now we even have the reworked banners for the extra DPS during boss fights. To list the pros of this build, I would start with its clear speed. It's just amazing to be always moving and massacring all the poor enemies on the way. The boss damage is also incredible. Once the build is done, you are going to kill even the big bosses in just a matter of seconds. And above all of that, this build is very simple and easy to put together. Now to list the cons, I would point a few important issues and I'd like to ask you to pay close attention here. You see, this build has a great survivability once it's done, but when you're leveling your character you need to pace your progression, because you're always very close to enemies. If you're not prepared, you are going to die. So take the extra time to pick up a few more levels before progressing to a high tier content. Another useful tip about your survivability is how to deal with stuns. On this build, you get stun immunity with cluster duels, but not everyone can afford them right away. If that's your case, or if you're just having problems with stuns sooner, do this simple trick of picking those evasion nodes and this mastery. Believe me, it helps a lot. As for budget, you can get it destroying early endgame maps with only around 90 chaos. To comfortable advanced 3 yellow maps, I recommend investing around 150 chaos, and for easily completing Erratras, I recommend investing around 6 divines. You only need 1 mandatory unique item for this build. the Stampede boots that guarantee that your movement speed will always be 150% of its base. This means that the downside of Cyclone of Tumult will mean absolutely nothing to us. For clear speed, I'll give it 9 out of 10. Cyclone never stops moving and have a huge area of effect, so you can farm your maps without the need to stop for casting or anything like that. It's just awesome and very satisfying. The boss damage is just amazing and deserves 10 out of 10. When this build is done, you're going to easily achieve over 15 million DPS, that is more than enough to destroy bosses in just seconds. For this survivability, I'll give it 9 out of 10. This build achieves almost 80,000 effective HP because of high armor, evasion, spell suppression, fortify, and even some instant life leech. Now, with the huge area effect from Cyclone of Tumult, you don't even need to stay very close to enemies on endgame, what gives you even more survivability. And finally, we have the destructive Fire Cyclone Berserker with the Marauder class. This build converts 100% of Cyclone's damage into fire to clear endgame maps like an amazing flame tornado. To list the pros of this build, I would start with the clear speed. With Cyclone you never need to stop moving, and that spin to win feeling is just awesome. This build also has a great single target damage with not much investment. Now, to list the cons, the main issue of this build is survivability. Even though this build has many defensive layers, it also needs to stay very close to enemies, which is a vulnerable position. And as a berserker, you already take 10% increased damage. As for budget, you can get it destroying early endgame maps with only around 90 chaos. To comfortably advance to yellow maps, you need to invest around 150 chaos, and for easily completing your atlas, I recommend investing around 6 divines, otherwise your survivability won't be enough and you will end up dying a lot. You need 2 mandatory unique items for this build. The first one is the Gamahu's Flame Axe that already converts 60% of your physical damage to fire, grants 20% fire penetration and triggers Molten Burst on hits for a lot more single target damage. Next, we also need a Stampede boots that guarantee that our movement speed is always 150% of its base. This is great because now we can replace the regular Cyclone with Cyclone of Tumult for a lot more damage and area of effect. For clear speed, this build gets 9 out of 10. As mentioned before, Cyclone is an awesome skill that never stops moving. You just need to slide through the maps, killing everything that gets near. The boss damage is amazing, deserves 10 out of 10. Now with Cyclone of Tumult we have a lot more attack speed to trigger Molten Burst many times and destroy even the biggest bosses in just a few seconds. The survivability on the other hand gets 7 out of 10. Even though this build has a great life pool, permanent fortify, high armor, high evasion and spell suppression, it's always in a vulnerable position, very close to enemies. That might be a little frustrating if you try high tier maps without investing in your survivability. And that's it for today, guys. Are you playing any of those meta builds? Please don't forget to tell me in the comments and leave a thumbs up to support the channel. I wish you guys an amazing day and don't forget to keep building!